In addition to the environmental benefits, what are some of the social and community benefits associated with sustainable real estate developments, such as improved health and well-being outcomes for occupants, enhanced livability of neighborhoods, and equitable access to green spaces and amenities? So Janet, would you like to start us out and maybe talk a bit about your project at the Wauwatosa Innovation Center?
I would love to kick us off here. I'm sure a lot of others have things to add to this. I'd also like to start, I know we've had a lot of investors and developers as part of this event. So to address part of your question, there are so many documented evidences of the cost savings and cost saving benefits to sustainable design in the use of materials, the savings in water, energy, and all kinds of things but the question focuses on social and community. And those are the people who are using the site every day, the residents, the business owners, and they're the ones who are going to benefit the most from sustainability. And there is also a whole wealth of research on the benefits, mental health benefits, physical health benefits, performance, things like the rate of recovery after an illness, the rates of lower rates of depression and anxiety from having natural features surrounding a site, from having cleaner air quality, performance on middle schoolers, performance on tests, from being able to look out a window and see living things. We could, I'm not great at quoting numbers, so I'm not going to try to, but like I said, there's a ton of information on that, and we could spend too much time on that. So instead, I wanted to bring it back to the experiential quality of sustainable design, something that's a little bit less tangible. And sustainable design is really involves good, thoughtful design around placemaking. And when we create beautiful places, thoughtful, beautiful places, it gives the people who live and work there a sense of home, an attachment to that place. And we know that when people have attachment to place, they tend to care more about it, and that builds environmental stewardship. It also builds joy and just happiness, like a great experience. People are drawn to places that are thoughtfully designed, and that's even amplified when it's sustainably designed. And the other piece of that is sustainable designs tend to have more green space. And even if it's the same amount, it's intentional green space. It's not that leftover lawn or parking island shrub. These are functioning, dynamic elements where users see the water come down, hit the site, and flow through it. They see the pollinators, they see the food growing, and they can participate in that, and it's interesting. It's like something that you can be engaged in. So those are some of the less tangible benefits that I think are really important to bring out.
And I can add onto that more from like the interior design aspects of that, since we design buildings. And one thing I'm very focused on in my role is building finishes. And something that I find so interesting is that, if you have a building or a space that you don't, have a lot of extra space to work with, one thing we can do is incorporate biophilic finishes or having a green wall. You could even have wood flooring or green walls and green ceilings that promote biophilic design and really helps harness that feeling of calmness. And even in hospitals, you'll walk down any hall and you'll see portraits of or paintings of landscapes and plants, and that's really to help enrich that healing feeling and help patients heal quicker, because our brains don't actually know the difference if we're looking at something real, if we're looking at a real plant, or if we're looking at a fake plant or portrait, which is incredible, and that can be low and no cost, and that's not going to add on to any cost of sustainable design.
I guess I'm next in line here. The one that came to mind for me was, all echoing everything that you guys are already saying, but for employers, you actually see a lower rate of sick days for higher indoor air quality within a building. So that's the one that I'll add to this conversation. It's a overall just better environment for human beings to live in and better contributor to the community as well.
Yeah, I'll echo that point actually. We use Michael Green as one of our architects, and he's a big mass timber architect out of Vancouver. And one of the things he recently did was a study with Google, because he just finished up a Google building down in San Jose. And they looked at the rate of sick days and the rate of occupancy in the mass timber building versus just a kind of normal traditional Google building. And if you've ever been to the Google campus, it's actually quite dull. You think of this like big tech company having a nice campus and they have a few nice buildings, but the rest are actually pretty kind of crappy Class C buildings. And so what the study showed was they had a huge, I think it was about 20 to 30% less sick days for the occupants that were living and working in the mass timber building. And then they actually had a 25% increase in occupancy for the mass timber building. And this was back when, during COVID, Google allowed most people just to work from home or work kind of hybrids in the office and then at home. So twofold. One is people working in the office more often, which is great because it increases productivity. And two, people are less sick, which helps them in their personal lives and also increases productivity. So I think those are the kind of two big aspects of sustainability and mass timber that really help the workplace.
Yeah, I would agree with that on the mass timber. We do a lot of green roofs. We do a lot of like kind of combination hardscape, and then landscape. I guess my one simple thing would be whether it's the mass timber or the green roofs, or just kind of some of the bio design. It gives you something really great to organize around that's not structural. And I think that really helps you to build your community and just in the ecosystem that feels different.
I'm just gonna echo everything you all said. You're all good. Yeah. I'll give you some more time back, actually.
Perfect. So for the next question, how can the real estate industry collaborate with other sectors such as technology, finance, academia to share practices, foster innovation in the adoption of sustainable building solutions?
I would say a big one is there needs to be some financial reform in the investing space, because there's not a lot of investors that are aligned with these sustainable initiatives, because you kind of have this interesting dichotomy between being able to afford the more sustainable materials and practices and the investors actually wanting to pay for it. And usually what it means is their return is going to decrease slightly. Sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's a little. And it's kind of always this back and forth that you're trying to weigh between is, can you pay for the material that's sustainable, or can you get the investors to align with that? So I think one of the big reforms is they actually really need to rethink how we look at investments and stop being so myopic about looking at the short term and looking rather at the long term and thinking about what is this building going to be in 50 to 100 years instead of what is my return going to be in 5.
So one thing as the architect, we're always bringing up to our developers and their investors is, what do you want to do for sustainability on the project? And we always just kind of get laughed at because someone thinks, I don't want to do solar on my project. It's never even going to pay itself off. And so I try to come in and say, well, what about these hundreds of little things we could be doing that'll improve the indoor air quality, improve the health of our tenants or building occupants? Going back to material finishes, we can find tons of materials that are the same exact cost as maybe one that is not sustainable. And when it comes to finishes specifically, all of them have sustainability documentation nowadays. So it's just all about knowing where to look and having a design team that knows where to find this information, because there's a lot of things that will cost money, but there's also a lot of just low hanging fruit that we could be gravitating towards. But a lot of people are just not educated to the point where they need to be quite yet.
Yeah, I think part of the education is also understanding some of the federal incentives that have recently been published. One of the things that we're doing at Edison is we're installing a geothermal system. And it's actually kind of like a quasi geothermal system because we're using the river to cool the building. And then we're actually using steam, which is a byproduct of We Energy's facilities. And there's steam lines running all around downtown Milwaukee to heat the building. And this qualifies us for the geothermal credit, which is up to 40% of the system we get back from the federal government as a credit. And then there's a few others. One is the 45L for energy efficiency. And then another one is the Section 179B, which is also for energy efficiency. And since we're a passive house building, we'll be tapping into both of those. And so I think it's really just kind of understanding, hey, it's more expensive, but we're also giving a lot of the investors a great tax incentive once the building's built that adds value.
Yeah, I think the big thing that we're doing just in terms of the overall P&L and the kind of the financial success of the building, but also just in terms of the overall sustainability is really disrupting that energy model. You know, the utilities are struggling anyway to deliver sustainably and affordably. And so, you know, making the decision to go fully behind the meter and provide all of the electricity really gives us the opportunity to control things like reliability, sustainability, costs over a long period of time. It allows us to have the energy be more in line with our sustainable objectives and really be able to control that. And then it also gives us the opportunity to collect a lot of data that typically would be in the hands of the utility, but isn't being used for the benefit of the customers. So that's, you know, it was a big step for us to say we're gonna go ahead and not even connect to the electricity grid. We're gonna generate 100% of our own power. But that also gives us a lot of different directions to head in financially as we develop that data and really add to the sustainability of the development.
And I think on top of that, going back to programs, some of the incentives too, of the cost savings, we get to share those benefits as program incentives towards helping residents, tenants, and for us, it's affordable housing. So it's like, how can we help build future leaders? How do we help them feel part of this building a sustainable community altogether? And I think another thing right on top of that is we're right down the street from University of Michigan. We've also got community colleges, you know, connected to us. Those act as really great classrooms and great places of how can we help think about training future generations of how do we continue to, yes, grow programs and grow thoughtful leaders to continue to make these changes that we're going to need in the future.
Anything else to add? I think some of the key takeaways are that even if the upfront costs might be more now, in the next 10 years, you might be doing a lot better, even 20-year outlook. So looking at the general impact overall. So let's look at the different certifications you can get in the building space. So how does these green building certifications impact property values and market competitiveness? So I'd like to call on Nate first, if that's okay. Can you talk a little bit about the International Living Future Certified?
Yeah, so I would say this is probably the best and most stringent certification that you can go after. They just rebranded to just Living Future, since I don't know if I was too hard to say. But basically they look at sustainability very holistically. So it's not just looking at how do we reduce operational carbon emissions through building energy, or how do we reduce embodied carbon emissions through selecting better materials. It's also looking at how do we impact the community, how does the building land in its environment so that it actually brings in people instead of just kind of being this wall. And so there's a 7-petal process that you go through that looks at all these different criterias. And then once you complete each petal, you get certified. And so Edison is the first project we're doing it on. We've done LEED certification. In the past, we've done passive house certification. And then actually Janet's done site certification for us, which she did a great job. And this will be the first Living Future challenge certification that we're doing. And I think it's just been a really interesting process. I'm definitely not probably the most educated as I should be on it because it's actually like a lot of just in the weeds. But I think probably the biggest thing that they look at, which I really like, is they do a life cycle assessment. And unlike LEED, for LEED to get your life cycle assessment credit, which if you don't know what that is, it's basically you take the building, you break it into its constituent elements, and then you quantify the carbon impact of each element. And for LEED, you just have to do it. They have no measurement. They just say, do an LCA and you'll get the credit. And we're like, okay, well, we'll do the LCA, but if we're terrible, like, does that matter? And they're like, no, it doesn't matter. And what ILFI does is they actually set certain requirements for reduction. So when you do the LCA, you compare it to a code compliant concrete building, and they want a certain amount of reduction depending on the height of the building for you to get that specific credit. And so instead of just like putting a stamp on a building and saying I'm LEED and I've done these things and not actually really taking a step in the right direction towards a more sustainable future, ILFI is actually quantifying it and saying let's actually reduce the carbon emissions of a building.
So, and your project will actually be the first Living Future project in Wisconsin, correct?
I think we're the second, is what
Second,
they said.
okay.
There's like a really small one up north.
Okay, very cool. Well, I'm just excited to see Living Future become more popular in Wisconsin as it is, because yes, we have LEED projects, but we're still even lagging there. And LEED was built, the certification program was really built for like your typical Class A downtown office building where there's a lot of density. It's really easy to get those location and transportation credits. But Living Future is just this amazing program where we're hoping to expand it because it's creating regenerative buildings. A sustainability building certification says this building will last, this building will not cause harm, and we can live through to see the future, but regenerative buildings are giving back concurrently, and it's helping us thrive as a civilization. So I'm really excited to see that project be complete and see some more Living Future projects come to fruition.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I was not that familiar with it, but as a sites accredited professional, sites does strive toward regenerative design, and it is the LEED equivalent for everything outside the building envelope. So it recognizes that creating a sustainable environment for any development project leads to a more resilient future for that project and for the community as a whole. And like these others, it's got 10 credit sections that you try to meet prerequisites and credits and then work towards, like with LEED, gold, platinum, gold, silver, gold, or platinum rating. So the cool thing, like Nate said, I was able to work with him on a project in Madison, but our first and only site certified project in the state is right here in Wauwatosa, called did I say it wasn't mine. I'll call out Roisin with New Eden Landscape Architecture here in Milwaukee. I forgot the name of it. Innovation Center. It's the Innovation Campus in Wauwatosa. And it is like almost 8-acre site, largest green roof in the state as well. And we need to do more of these. We need more certified sites, projects, or other certifications, Livable Futures, LEED, all of these. But sites is a little sister, little brother to LEED, and it is just growing. So get the word out that we need to be thinking more about the site around the building envelopes as well.
Well, there's actually a secondary sites coming very soon in Milwaukee, which is fun. So a little bit more about sites. It's looking at the waste that you're hauling away from the site project, and you're tracking that monthly. Also looking at the erosion, how are things being capped off and managed that way. But it's great to see that.
adding soil, vegetation, and water, and all, energy, materials.
Yeah, capturing all of that. Anything else to add about perhaps LEED or other certifications?
I'll jump in here. Nate mentioned passive house certification, so what we're seeing, the benefits of passive house obviously are numerous, including on the energy and indoor air quality side of things. For those of you that aren't familiar with passive house, it is certification for not just houses, but also large multifamily buildings and other types of commercial buildings as well. And it really focuses on your energy use as well as indoor air quality sections and overall sustainability of the building as well. So the benefits really, I would say, in the long term include regulatory benefits as well. We're starting to see passive house level energy efficiency on buildings be required in some provinces in Canada and as a long-term step code. So as well as, we mentioned future-proofing your building from a sustainability standpoint. Passive house is really looking at, long-term energy efficiency of your building and really making sure that it meets that highest standard from an energy standpoint.
I spoke with Roisin about this project in Wauwatosa, and one of the things she brought out that is true, I think, of any of these certifications is that it forces the whole design team, developers and contractors to get on board together at an early stage because they're not easy. You're trying to meet really high performance standards all the way through. And so it really encourages or forces an integrated design team process.
I will say one thing. I think that idea or that notion of integration is going to become more and more important as it relates to these standards because, for example, with the passive house and the amount of insulation that there is, and then if you take kind of that constraint, but then you look at how people typically design, for example, multifamily buildings and how the MEP kind of address building loads and that type of thing. Obviously, they're always designing for risk analysis and to meet their worst possible or their greatest possible energy requirements. But I think the constraint is going to become more and more thermal as opposed to electrical or mechanical. And that's really going to not cause problems, but it's going to require more elegance around some of the passive house standards that relate to insulation, for example. Just because if you take geothermal and passive house level insulation, you start to have unintended consequences around thermal energy and the amount of heat that you're capturing. And so I think that these standards will evolve to consider things like, I'm gonna have geothermal, but I'm also gonna have passive house. How am I gonna manage it? The geothermal won't let me insulate to the maximum degree because if I create that much heat, I'll fry my geothermal field because I'll just be exchanging too much heat in the summer. So it's just really interesting how I think these standards are going to change because they're going to become more and more integrative in terms of the environment.
So we just have a few minutes left, but to touch on the last question really quickly. So with the increasing focus on ESG, environmental, social, and governance criteria by investors, how can commercial real estate firms effectively measure and report that sustainability performance?
Locally, we have the Wisconsin Sustainable Business Council, and they have a Green Masters program, which I think some of us are familiar with. And I haven't actively used it, but that is a really great resource for people who are looking to track that information for their investors. And from my understanding, it's a fairly simple process, very easy to go through, and anyone can do it.
Yeah, it's a great online platform that walks you through all steps, all three pillars of ESG to look at where you have opportunities to actually establish a procedure or have that in place. So I agree with that.
I guess I'll just add to that, I think that's a great recommendation of resource. I think the really important thing here is to identify, which metrics are important to your investors. And then there are a lot of resources out there for any of those given metrics to help you track them. A lot of this data, I would guess your particular firm or building is already gathering in some way, shape, or form. That's what I found with a lot of our clients, they are actually already have a lot of this data. And it's just a question of packaging it up in a way that the particular investors want to see. There are a number of different standards out there. TCFD, the UN principles of responsible investment that a lot of investors are signing on to. Particularly, that's more on the institutional level, so it may not be applicable to a lot of local folks. But those are the types of things that you have to make sure you are finding out what your investors are looking for, and then looking for those resources that are able to help you hit those specific metrics and targets that they're looking for.
I would just go back to the certificates that you're going to get on your building. I mean, that's a great way to kind of just track progress and be able to report, because it's a third-party institution that does it for you. But the other way we do it at our firm is we look at the LCA and the energy model, and we do it at every stage of design. So at SD, we'll do an LCA and an energy model, then at DD, and then at CD, and then even after we build the building, we actually do a post-mortem energy model and LCA to kind of validate what we assumed and make sure we actually met the targets we wanted to. And so one of the things we really like about the LCA is that you have to get EPDs, which are environmental declarations, from every single contractor that you're working with and every single material supplier. And they have to give you that, and it basically discloses full chain of custody of where the materials came from. So one of the big things for us is wood, obviously, because a lot of our buildings are made out of wood. And so we want to make sure that all the wood that we're getting is not coming from somewhere in South America where they're smuggling wood out and shipping it to our site. We want to make sure it's all compliant with FSC or SFI certification. So I think a third-party certificate and then doing really just constant updates to your LCA and energy models is critical.
Well, I think we all know that there is no such thing as a carbon intensity meter. But I think we can come pretty close to replicating that. And so what we're gonna be doing is looking at 5-minute interval data to basically take all of the systems that Nate mentioned, the building model and the building management system, its full integration. And it basically extending that data through whatever algorithms we need to put together so that the building has a real-time carbon intensity meter that's attached to all of the major mechanical systems.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, panelists, for providing such valuable insights. Let's give them a round of applause, everybody.